Hi, welcome back to Sky's the Limit Fund Speaker Series. I'm Brenda Zane. I am one of the lucky board members to serve on the board of Sky's the Limit Fund and to be able to really help families who need some assistance in getting a young person to wilderness therapy. And it's an incredibly effective therapy for the right kids, and it's also incredibly expensive. So we help families fund that experience and also then wrap them with services after wilderness therapy when your young person comes home, and to make sure that that transition is smooth. And so I get to be the host of this guest speaker series, which is fun because I get to speak with so many amazing people. And today is no exception. Today we're going to be speaking with Casie Fariello, and she is the founder and CEO of OPLM, which is Other Parents Like Me, a support service for parents who have kids who are struggling with substance use, with mental health, who are going through different treatment programs. And so just looking forward to a conversation, as we imagine most of the people listening here are parents. And so this should be really relevant to you. So welcome, Casie.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm so excited to be here.
We're
Um,
excited
and
to
I,
have you.
I'm really excited.
Yes, and you are well aware of the wilderness therapy experience. And so you're a fellow alumni wilderness parent like me, and know how difficult that is to go through that experience, let alone our kids, right? But for us as parents. So nice to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, in fact, um, I actually used Sky's the Limit to be able to afford it. So, and they were very
Yay.
transformational for us to get our child to where they needed to go.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's great to hear that. I think a lot of times in working with an organization like Sky's the Limit Fund, we don't always get to see the output, the result of some of the families that we help. So it's great to speak with a mom who's been there in that situation where you really need that level of treatment, and to be able to put it into action and make it happen to keep your
Mhm.
young person safe, right, is really huge.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's scary. It's really scary when you're in that place and you're thinking, how am I going to afford this? What am I going to do? And uh, have Sky's the Limit, walk me through the process and how to, find the place. And with my educational consultant was huge.
Right. Yep. And it's, you're not only dealing with the financial aspect of it, like you said, you're also dealing with where is the right place, which program has the right therapist or the right program or the right location, and, insurance. I mean, and then you're also dealing with your child who is struggling. So it's just a lot to
Mhm.
have on your plate. So we're grateful to have you here today. And
Thank you.
you took all this experience that you have and you have really put it into motion with OPLM. So tell us a little bit about that, and then we're going to dive into some of the kind of parental aspects of this whole journey.
Yeah. So my older son is the one who took me down the path of starting to look inward at myself when all the insurance company stuff that they allowed us to do didn't work for him. It wasn't a right fit for him. So we did end up sending him to wilderness therapy. Then he went to a therapeutic boarding school, and that was really transformational for us because they had family weekends. And when that was 2019. Well, guess what? When he graduated to go on to the transitional living, it was 2020. So he was so excited about going to Tucson and having like a life, and the world shut down and they were stuck in their little place. And I felt just like him. I felt stuck, like I lost all my families. And so I started support groups for them. That was where I started, and went from 1 to 8 and 14, my 14 families to 350 through word of mouth for that program. And I turned to my friend, my co-founder, Liz, and said, oh, okay, like this needs to be bigger. And I mean, you and I have talked, Brenda, there's just not enough places for
Yeah.
parents to land. um, and you don't know what's going to speak to them. So that's why I love, like, we're kind of both in this space, and hope some end with you, some end with us. And I think that's amazing because we want it to feel right.
Yeah.
So that's what we have is 15 support groups in a week. We have a speaker talk. Brenda's on one of them.
I know, that was so great.
Yes.
Well, it does, like you said, it speaks to the need, and,
Yeah.
when I look at the research that's out there, I think the latest number I saw was, something like 9.3 million people, young people between the age of 12 and 24, have been diagnosed with a substance use disorder, which you and I know that means there's equally as many who have never been diagnosed. Where are all those parents landing? Where are
Mm,
they getting that support and finding a familiar face who can relate to them and say, I get it. I really
mhm.
get what this experience is. And so there could be 300 organizations like yours and mine, and it still wouldn't be enough, right?
No,
There's
wouldn't be
just
enough.
such a huge need. So, and that's also why at Sky's the Limit Fund we offer that support after somebody comes home, because as you know, it
Right.
is a very tricky time when your young person comes home from treatment and you're trying to find local resources and all that. So yeah, it's there is just a huge need. But maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the sort of key learnings that you walked away with. I know we talked a little bit about vulnerability, and that's really an interesting concept when you're just getting into this, because we think as parents, well, we have to have all the answers. We have to know what to do. So talk a little bit about that with us.
Yeah. The first thing that I learned and didn't want to do was be vulnerable with my child. That was the first thing that the wilderness therapist was like, yeah, you need to kind of talk about the stuff that you have not been talking about.
Yeah.
And that was huge for me. And I'm so inspired by Brene Brown. And I love how she talks about the biggest myth in vulnerability is that it's weakness. And actually, she talks about it as a strength and looks at it as her definition of vulnerability is uncertainty. Huh? What? Let's see. That's normal for us. Risk. Uh huh. And emotional exposure. Oh boy, as a parent, do we not want to do that with our kids? Um,
Right.
and my favorite quote around that is, "Being a parent is to let your heart walk outside your body" by Elizabeth Stone.
Mm, yeah.
And how vulnerable it is that to have your heart walking outside. And now this person who I'm supposed to be protecting and caring for and saving, I'm supposed to be the strong one. And if I'm vulnerable and telling them, "Hey, I don't have all the answers," or "I don't know if I'm doing this right," we feel that we're failing them.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. And I think there's also a level of, I don't want to burden them with
mhm,
any of my stuff. I don't want to layer that on. But if we don't do that, we're only sharing part of us with them.
mhm.
But it is a really tricky balance to know. And I like that you said that your wilderness therapist helped you with that, because that's something that I didn't realize when my son went to wilderness therapy that I was going to be getting a lot of therapy. Like I thought he was
Yeah.
going to be doing all of the work. And so that's something, if people are listening and maybe you're trying to make that decision about wilderness therapy, just to know that the family is really involved. So it's not send your kiddo, they get fixed and come back. There's a lot of interaction, a lot of therapy that really can help you as a parent as well.
Yeah. And when you're vulnerable, you don't know how that's going to land with your kid either. And that's another part of the scariness, that there's no guarantee. Nobody's going to, the wilderness therapist, you or I, having parents come with us, or you as a parent coach, me as a parent coach. Um, you want to guarantee that if I do this, my kid's going to get better.
Right.
And that is not how it works. I wish I could say it is.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Yes. But having that person there to help guide you through with your child is enormously helpful because this is foreign territory. It is just complete foreign territory. And so I think it's great just to hear you don't have to have all the answers. You get to be vulnerable. You get to say, I don't know, let's figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I have these a couple of things that I want to share that we have parents have been vulnerable since they were born, and we just don't even see it as vulnerability. And I find that interesting, but maybe this will resonate with some people. The first time you sit with your child who is sad or disappointed and resisting to the urge to fix them, that's vulnerable. Leaving your child with a child minder for the first time, babysitter, whatever, a nanny, whatever you want to call them, that's vulnerable. Letting your kid try their first new class or activity or school, that's vulnerable. Giving your child the permission, which I'm not from New York City. I see New York City like they let their kids go on the subway way sooner than I ever would. They are going off somewhere alone. That's vulnerable. Watching your teen for the first time make their own decisions, oh, that's vulnerable. And I think, Brenda, you're going to really relate to this one. Setting boundaries with your kids is vulnerable.
Yes. It's
So
huge because you
we've been
don't know how they're going to
practicing.
respond.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been practicing since the day they were born, but we just
Yeah.
don't even realize we're so like stuck in like vulnerability, what that means and what vulnerability is. That knowing those things that we've always done it was really helpful for me to view it that way.
Right. Yeah, and those feel like really good stepping stones, right? To say, okay, as they grow, we start letting them do more. We're feeling more vulnerable. And then, not every parent gets to where you and I did with our kids, but that's the time where you have to say, okay, I can do this. I can make these big shifts. And you said something there, which I wanted to just tap on, which was, you know, I thought that they were going to be fixed, and having those expectations of what is going to happen, how this is going to look, how this is going to go. My friend's kid did this, and they came out and went and did this. What about the expectations that we have of
Mhm.
ourselves and our kids, and how did that play into your experience?
Oh gosh, that's like I think along with the vulnerability, that's the hardest part. Um, because when I had my little boy in my arms, and he already had a heart murmur when he was born, and there was that, right? So, oh, already like now he's outside of me and I can't protect him. Well, now I'm things have gone crazy at our house, and I've heard your podcast too, Brenda. Like we had running away, holes in the walls, suicidal
We know
ideation.
crazy.
Yeah, yeah, we know crazy. And I thought, what happened to that little baby? Where and what happened to what
Yeah.
I thought? Like he was going to go to college, he was going to graduate from high school, he was going to be a super soccer star. I mean, like oh no, now he's going to do that. Like I thought that this was that I knew this is what it was going to follow, and it's crushing. It's a grieving process of not having not having them go the way things were or thought or planned. And
Yeah.
that's vulnerable because you're having to let go of what you saw in the future, and now you're back to that uncertainty and that risk and that emotional, space.
Right. Yeah, and I understand the emotion around that, because in our world, that says our kids' success says so much about us,
Right.
or we think it does. And
Yeah.
so even though we might not be kind of consciously making that connection, when our kids are struggling and they're not going the direction that we thought they were going to go, we somehow believe that it says something about us.
Yes.
And that's very difficult. It's a very difficult break to make, and to be able to feel vulnerable enough to say, go do this, go try that. Okay, you're not going to go to college. Okay, you're not going to play soccer. Okay, your life's going to look so different than anything that I ever could have imagined. And how were you able to get there? I know you said that you had, therapy through your son's wilderness. Are there other ways that you found to sort of reframe all of this in your mind to allow yourself to be vulnerable and to kind of let go of those expectations?
Um, well, I don't know if I've ever shared this, but when my son first started to struggle, I told my husband, we're going to couples counseling now. And we started couples counseling right away so that we could be on the same page, because it's very vulnerable. There's an extra vulnerability when the co-parent is not co-parenting with you, because I heard that
Mhm.
enough from others. And so I was so afraid that, so there was also that, right? There's another part. I was afraid. So that was one of the paths. I started doing peer-to-peer support, which for me initially was 12 steps. And then I was, as you know, exposed to the partnership to end addiction and a different path. And um, I was like, seeing other people, other parents share their vulnerability and what was happening in their house gave me permission to push farther and
Mm,
to change and grow more, and to actually say to my son, hey, yeah, I did some things that I'm not proud of and I'm sorry.
yeah.
Oh, it was really hard.
That is really hard. It's really, really hard. Yeah. Well, and it's so important. I'm glad you said that about being able to use, because the stigma that we feel as parents of these, I call them very special, beautiful, challenging kids. Um, there's that stigma that says, don't talk about it, don't
Yeah,
share,
yeah.
don't let anybody know this is going on in your home. And
Mhm.
so the more we buy into that, the less people talk and the quieter everybody gets. And then our kids really suffer from that because we're not out there finding the resources and learning these tools. And I know that, I imagine in the groups, that you run, that people are, that you're seeing that dynamic of, oh, this person shared this and now I learned that, and sort of feeding off of each other's experience in a positive way, not in a,
Mhm.
you know, a, a ruminating way. Do you see those little connections and sparks happening?
Oh my gosh. And it's beautiful when it happens, when someone's telling, like, hey, this happened, and you see someone who's further along, and then you have someone who's brand new, and they see this person who's further along and they're smiling and they're laughing, and they're like still in this crying hysterical, I'm never going to be able to do this. If I talk about this, I'm going to ruin my child's life. That's the other part I hear,
Yeah.
is if I say their name, if I say that I'm here, if I say it out loud, I'm now also the reason they're not meeting my expectations in future life.
Yeah.
And that is hard. um, so yeah, there's that, but when those sparks happen, even in anonymous, even when people keep their camera off, we see that a lot. Even when people keep their camera off and they don't name themselves, or they'll just put something in a chat. Those sparks of like, oh, I feel so heard. And nobody said like repeat it after them or anything. They just felt heard because somebody else said the same thing is that's behind their walls, that's happening in their walls, and or that's happening
Yeah.
with their kid in wilderness. And they're like, oh, so your kid complained about this too? Like, it's like, oh, okay. There's like a
Right.
release.
Yeah, yeah. Did you, besides, you had said that there were some groups that you attended, kind of what did your support system look like? And how did you start, because I know that you're probably like me, where you're better with self-care now than you were then, but how did you start sort of connecting and taking care of yourself through all this?
Mm. Um, my favorite thing is that we have a hot tub outside, and on a really bad day, even like I would go in the hot tub multiple times just to sit there for 5 minutes.
Nice.
Yeah, just to like disconnect my experience in my body, because it's so attacks everything. It attacks your, I mean, my back was hurting, my feet were hurting, I couldn't walk. I don't know if you had any of that experience. I was just felt like a broken person because I was taking everything in physically
Yeah.
instead of letting it go. And so that was my first step, was like going into, you could go, or I would go into a bathtub. I started to do all the things that we don't want to hear about, meditate. And I don't have pain anymore. That took a long time, just so you know. That was only
Yeah.
been like the last year. Um, I can walk. I don't have pain in my feet. And that's what told me that I was starting to do the right things, even when things weren't perfect with my kid.
Mm. And it feels so counterintuitive, doesn't it, as a mother, and I'm sure as a father too, to say, "Well, wait, the house is on fire over here, and I'm gonna go sit in the hot tub? Like, that doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense." But it actually does, and I know you and I are probably too, that just we preach it all the time to say, even when it doesn't feel like it makes sense,
Mhm.
even when it feels like the wrong thing to do, it is the actual it I like to say it should be part you should think of your self-care as part of your child's treatment plan,
Yeah.
because you are the only one that can give you're the only one that could give your son a healthy Casey, right? No one
Mhm.
else can do that for you. And
Mhm.
so I love hearing that. And I always like asking about people's self-care because there's so many unique ways that people take care of themselves, right? And like you said, it's not just the physical, like going in the hot tub or doing yoga. It's also meditating. It's also taking the time to take care of your own mind, because this will do a number on you from a psychological standpoint. And in getting that really in place is just so important.
Yeah. And the other part is that I learned that, talking to doing family therapy with the clinician, doing group therapy with the clinician, leading it, I behave differently. I behave differently than when I'm in a peer group. In a peer group, I feel so much more comfortable being messy. Whereas with the therapist, I feel like, oh, I'm supposed to show up differently. I don't,
Yeah.
and the first time you actually talk about it in the peer group, now you've released the valve, right? You've let it out, and now I can bring it to family therapy. I can bring it to the group therapy that the program provides, because I'm sure you did the same thing, had some group therapy, family groups and stuff. And I didn't understand until I started running those peer support, and they were talking about how much they felt changed with their kid, how much they felt changed with the therapy, how key that was. And when I walk away from peer support, peer support group, that's like the biggest amount of oxygen I can give myself.
Right. Yes. It kind
Sounds,
of gives you yeah, it gives you
yeah,
the fuel to keep going, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you, as a mom, as a human, kind of some of the big picture takeaways that you have through this experience that you would have never kind of anticipated,
Mhm.
when you went into it?
Um, One is, it's okay to get creative with how your child is, like I said, the person, this your heart walking outside your body, and you do want 100% to save them, and it's okay to get creative. We followed all the things insurance said, and then we went and I did a GoFundMe, and that's how we got creative to send him where. But that doesn't mean there's not other ways that you can get creative to like break in and start to change the narrative of the household. Um, And that was really important for me. Like, you don't have to just follow what the therapist said. It's okay to trust your gut. And we lose that, don't we? When we have the chaos in our house, like we start to like not trust ourselves anymore.
Right, right. I love that creativity piece because and the gut, and I think those go together because as a parent, you know your child better than anybody.
Yep.
And so I think you have to bump up what you're getting from professionals, from insurance companies against that gut knowledge to
Yes.
say yes or no, or maybe a combination, or maybe something different. And to be confident enough to speak that, because it can be intimidating when you are like, I don't have any letters after my name. I don't have a PhD. I don't have a master's. I
Yes.
don't have a LCS, all those. And so it can be intimidating when you're talking to these people. And I think that's a good reminder that you just gave, to trust your gut, to know, not that you're going to disregard what professionals say
Right.
by any
No.
means, but to really think about what works for our family, what works for this young person, and that could change too, right, over time. It's like, well, this worked up until last week, and then now that doesn't work anymore. So to be able to be fluid enough to keep going with it.
Yeah, that is another part that I'll add. Yeah, that ability to pivot um, is key, and that's part of trusting your gut. You're like, oh, that felt right before. I got to pivot.
Yeah.
Um, that's huge, and that's vulnerable.
Yeah, back to the vulnerability
Yeah,
thing.
it's vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's vulnerable because you're being told not to trust your gut, and you're like, no, I need to trust my gut on this, or I know my kid. Can we try this? And you know, it's um, it's important to do that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm this is all just resonating so much, obviously, with the shared experience that we have. And I think you gain so much insight and wisdom from hearing so many stories, right? You're sitting and listening to so many families and their experiences, and really knowing, at least what I take away from doing this speaker series and the work that I do, is there is not a cookie cutter way to get your child from a place where they're not healthy and they're misusing substances and they're struggling with their mental health. There is not a straight line to the other side. And so you really have such a depth of knowledge about so many different ways that can happen, and so many different kinds of treatment programs. Is that something that, did you go into this knowing that, or is that something that came to you later?
That's just, I think those of us who are willing to be creative and pivot, we're like researchers, man. we,
Yes. Yes.
we
We
are,
could
we are,
qualify for the FBI right
yes,
here.
we reread books, we listen to podcasts, we go to we go to find somebody who's going to do a webinar. Like, we're always looking for something that's going to say, oh, that's how I'm going to pivot. That one
Yeah.
speaks to me, or that one speaks to me.
Yeah.
And that's important. Yeah, we're
Awesome.
definitely researchers.
Yes. We can add that title to our names.
Yeah, exactly.
Master researcher. Awesome. Thank you,
Awesome.
Casie, so much for joining us. This has been such a pleasure, and we will make sure and put resources, OPLM, in there so that people can find you and all the groups, your amazing groups, that you can really get into a very specific group that helps you identify with the other people in there. And we're just so thrilled that you're Sky's the Limit Fund alumni parent, part of our family as a nonprofit, and just wish you all the best.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.